well. And of course, thank you everybody for hosting me within this very thought-provoking format of seminars. I am following them since a few events, and I'm honored, honestly, to be here and to have the occasion to present to you an ongoing research, which is actually still ongoing. So what I'm going to present you are the preliminary findings of this research. Ecco, now let me open. So now I stop seeing you, which is a bit difficult because I would have preferred to talk in front of an audience. By the way, just to introduce my project. This is a project about the transnationalization of the radical right, which of course I conduct as any project, as any research I conduct with a wonderful and skillful group of people who are helping me to collect the data on the transnationalization of the radical right in Europe. As the title says, between movement and parties. So everything, let's say, I will present to you is part of a collective enterprise, is the product of a collective enterprise. And of course, as I said, since these are just the preliminary findings of our several sub-work packages within this big framework of the research question. So why do the far right become transnational? But more than the why, more than this explanation, now we are very much interested also in the documentation. So how strong, how dominant is this process, which is something also just empirically very much worth of investigation. And so what I'm going to present to you is the project preliminary finding, and I will be more than happy to receive your honest, let's say, thought about my findings. So also suggestions on where to go from now. So taking stock and moving forward, what we can do now with all these first overview that we got from the data. The research problem, as you know, it is salient. So the transnationalization of the radical right is something very urgent to be investigated for several reasons, not only empirical, because so far still we don't know much about the transnationalization of the radical right. It is under our eyes. I mean, not only at the institutional level, European Parliament, but also at the non-institutional level, so process, demonstration. So let's say, to use a concept, the transnationalization of the radical right is there in the ballots and the barricades, fine, but still we have an increasing research on that, but we don't have, you know, an overall comprehension, also a comparative overview, at least for what concerns Europe, of the degree or the extent of this phenomenon, but also the various forms, trajectories, which is something I would like to propose to you. Why it is a scientific, normative relevant question? Of course, because it is clear that this question also dialogate, communicate with many other important questions concerning today the radical right. So transnationalizing and the radical right is also rebranding itself. It's undergoing a process of normalization, mainstreamization, and then we see that there are opportunities for this transnationalization at the supranational level, but also at the local national level. And then transnationalizing of the radical right means also new forms and different and perhaps bigger forms of recruitment and also legitimacy. In my our empirical research questions in this project have been mainly three, and I start from the second and the third one, which are those questions that on which still we have a bit of more finding. So what is the extent of the transnationalization of the far right in Europe overall, Western and Eastern Europe? And this is why in this research project we are investigating 7 European countries. So we are investigating the transnationalization, whatever it can mean. And now I will give you our definition, including several European countries, Eastern and Central and Western Europe. But also, what our second research question is, what roles do interactions, so links, networks with other far-right actors in other countries, and what roles the frames used by the far-right play in transnationalization? And then there is a third question, which is probably also the most ambitious one, on which still we are working a lot, because we still don't have the proper data to answer these questions. And we hope to collect the data concerning the interviews with representatives or spokespersons of radical right movement and parties. So the interviews we will probably match with our third operational question, which is how and under what conditions does the far right transnationalize? So I have already somehow anticipated what are our methods. Basically, the idea, the starting point, is to conceptualize the radical right in a very comprehensive way, in a way which look at the all, let's say, radical right milieu that we can find currently in any European countries, including political parties, but also non-political parties, so-called radical right social movements, but also according to a broad vision, a broad conceptualization of the radical right, we are also interested in investigating far-right anti-gender, but also far-right, more recent waves of protest and actors linked to the Novax mobilization. So let's say, on the one hand, we have started from a conceptualization of the radical right, which is very broad, including the institutional side, but also the more extreme forms of the radical right. And this has been chosen also with reference to the so-called fourth wave of the radical right in Europe, but all over the world, no? Which is a wave which actually is showing also many hybrid actors, not the so-called movement parties. So in our view, it was necessary to deal with the topic of transnationalization, not limiting ourselves to the institutional arena, nor limiting ourselves to the protest arena. So we wanted to include all the, let's say, possible varieties of radical right collective actors currently in European countries. I want to stress that this research is focusing on the mass organizational level. So we are not looking at activist, individual sympathizer. We are adopting a mixed method. We have adopted a mixed method, mainly coming from social movement studies, which is my main field of research. So what we did was also a sort of attempt, an effort to transfer, to adopt ideas, concepts, theories, but also methods coming from social movement studies, which usually, but not always, or of course, are focusing on left-wing progressive movements, where we have adopted all these ideas, strategies, concepts in order to look at the regressive portion of the political conflict. And so we have, on the one hand, as you can see here, we have adopted, in order to start to see the amount of transnationalization, so I mean how much, so to say, we have used what in social movement studies is called protest event analysis, so tracing any instance of transnational political event of the radical right from 2008 until 2022. But also we wanted to somehow mix this more formalistic and systematic view of the extent of transnationalization of the radical right in Europe, pertaining our 7 countries, which I will tell you in a while which are they. We also wanted to mix this protest event with something more qualitative, which is called event chronology. So for each event, we also wanted to unpack the narratives, the reasons, the issue, the content. Then we also use a social network analysis based on links among far-right organizations in these 7 countries, again, longitudinally, so since 2028 until 2022, in order to see to investigate the more, let's say, relational aspect of this transnationalization. So not so much the practices, the events, but the relational organizational linkages. And then we have actually a third part, which actually conceptualizes the transnationalizations in terms of topics, content. So what do they talk about in a similar way? Is there a similar saliency on important topics for the radical right, like immigration, nationalism, citizenship, gender, but also socioeconomic issues? So, well, what we did was through a content analysis of social media of these organizations that we have mapped due to the social network analysis, we have also applied a content analysis, again, longitudinal, in order to see if the topics mainly mobilized by radical rights in different European countries were similar in terms of saliency, but not only the topic, also the frames used to refer to these topics. And finally, the last part of our data collection actually concerns, as I said, interviews. Finally, with the interviews, we hope to be able to unpack a little bit, and not to go for documentation, but also for comprehension of the phenomenon, and to unpack a bit more what are the reasons why or why not far-right organizations look with an increasing interest to the international arena. And so I already mentioned slightly what is our approach. Mainly it comes from the school, from the research school within which I'm located, which is social movement studies. So this idea to conceptualize the radical right according to a multi-actor concept, but also according to a perspective which is very much actor-centered, agent-centered, and also according to a processual and, let me say, interactionist approach. In terms of the state of the art, now I don't want to spend too many words on this. I insist on the relevance of focusing on the transnationalization of the radical right, because if we see now concretely what we have a research which is increasing, but which is also some here and there fragmented, let me say. So we have a portion of studies focusing on far-right political parties and the European election, which is mainly frameable, let me say, under the concept of Europeanization. But we also have several attempts to look at the transnationalization of the radical right, for instance, in connection with the web. So the use of the web for transnationalizing content and networks. I have to say that there are very few works focusing on practices, so focusing on the event, the political events through which and during which, in a sort of eventful process, the radical right transnationalize. Well, making stock of all these studies and these suggestions, also methodological, that we could derive from the state of the art, and having in mind theoretically and also analytically all the scholarship on transnationalization of social movements, usually left-wing social movements, well, we designed our research design, giving our definition of what we mean for transnationalization, and giving also planning our methods for collecting data according to this definition. It is important to stress that for the moment, while the literature on social movements, which I said and I insist on, mainly focuses on the left libertarian side of the political conflict, offers to us also some explanation of the why, but also some explanation of the possible mechanism through which a social movement go beyond borders, no? So we have studies talking about brokerage, diffusion, the importance of resonance, the importance of frames. So we have tried also here and there, also in our operational choices, to capitalize on these suggestions which come from social movement studies, although focusing on a different empirical referent. So I will go now quick on these, let's say, analytical also tools, guiding tools that we have in mind, looking at the regressive portion. And let me, start concretely with our definition. So in order to capture international actions and interactions of radical right collective actors in our 7 countries, we did define transnationalization in terms of framing, so in terms of issues, but also most importantly, similarity of frames on these issues. We have secondly defined transnationalization in terms of networking across borders, and then finally in terms of joint or coordinated action. And as I said, we also have a very broad definition of the radical right, including parties, movement, anti-gender organization, but also anti-vax conspiracies actors. And the countries where are actually 7 European democracies, Austria, France, UK, Italy, Poland, Hungary, and Czech Republic. I anticipate there is an important elephant in the room here. We didn't have inside our sample Germany, which actually would constitute an important actor concerning the radical right and transnationalization. But we can talk later in the Q&A session why we don't have it and what we can do for including also this important country. So the portion concerning transnationalization in terms of networks. Here, our research is not new. Actually, there are already here and there important studies that have already tried to capture the extent of internationalization in terms of linkages. Also, here I want to express immediately one of my concern, which also is partly a weakness of this portion of research. It would have been much better to ask the various organizations in each country if and when they concretely have extent of organizational linkages and collaboration. But as you can imagine, the easiest way to grasp empirically this social networking is to use the online sphere. Then it remains the question how much the online sphere and the offline spheres are connected. I mean, how much what we can infer from an overview based on the online sphere networking across borders, what does this tell us in terms of the possibility of the formation of a collective identity and a collective mobilization and political action also outside the online. This, I mean, I raise immediately these questions as an important question that perhaps we can talk later on. But in terms of social networking, so what we did, our first action was to try to map all the existing radical right organizations according to the definition that I just pointed out, all the radical right organizations existing in these 7 European countries. And through a snowball technique, starting from the most important ones, and then searching also the tiny subcultural groups, neo-Nazi groups, cultural association. At the end of the day, more or less, we did collect a map of more or less 100 organizations per country. Then, focusing on these organizations, we started to unpack our empirical questions. And concerning networks, here the 2 main guiding empirical questions were, so do far-right, radical right, liberal actors constitute a network in spreading illiberal content on social media? So is there a networking which somehow configurate a sort of international radical right? And which actors are the central one in this international network? Which countries, for instance, are the champion of the radical right internationalization? As I told you, we wanted to map network in a longitudinal way, so since 2008 until 2022, and on the basis of all social accounts, actually, I want to repeat, all social accounts of all these hundreds, more or less 700 organizations, actually, we started to code the international links using the tweet function. Unfortunately, as you can see here, another second weakness, actually we then worked concretely only on around 250 accounts. Why? For technical reasons, because some of them were not existing or not accessible by our software meant to retrieve all the tweets. Others were not accessible longitudinally, at least for a portion of years, that could have allowed us to map also longitudinally these dynamics of internationalization. So we worked on 250, which anyway is not a low number concerning this kind of, let me say, also hidden communities, especially for the non-political party side. Some descriptive statistics. Has already previous studies, I can mention Froyo and Ganesh 2029, I can mention Anita Nissen more recently, Dominika Troina, who is an expert on anti-gender movement and network. Even more recently, there is an article of 2022. So in accordance to all the previous few studies concerning networking transnational on the regressive side, we also found that actually, while there is a huge still networking online for what concerns the domestic sphere, so for what concerns all the other national radical right organizations in the 7 countries, each of them, still the portion, you can see the portion of international networking in relative terms is just 6% for all these communities. If we disaggregate these 6% in terms of, well, which kind of actor, we see that actually mainly political parties and political movement and political parties are, let's say, the most internationalized ones. And this is true in all our countries that we have mapped. If then we want to look at the international configuration, actually, this is what we get. We see clearly that are some countries which are more central to this international community of the radical right, like, for instance, France. But also we see that within these countries, there are some individual organizations. some individual organizations which actually play a fundamental role in networking internationally, but also simultaneously in networking domestically. So as you can see here, for this map, if with several measures of social network analysis, we try to capture what are the central actors, the prominent actors in each country for what concern both the domestic networking and the transnational one. Actually, we see clearly that there are some champions like the Marie Le Pen party, but also in terms of far-right political parties, but also other important actors like Ordo Iuris, which is an important anti-gender actor in Hungary. So we see that there are some, what we called, after several measures, let's say some brokers. Some brokers which are not necessarily far-right political parties, and this is also something that confirms the necessity to give a broad overview on the conceptualization of what is currently far-right. There are some brokers which clearly play an important role in networking the overall domestic milieu within which they are prominent in terms of linkages with the international milieu for which they are prominent as well. So it looks like more than finding that some countries or some radical right milieus are more internationalized than other, what we can see as a final, let's say, in first preliminary finding is that for sure these transnationalization trends is something very common to the 7 countries that we have analyzed, to the 7 far-right milieu. There are some countries which perform better than the others. So, for instance, it is clear that the French radical right scene is very active in this international networking. But there are also, probably most importantly, some important brokers. No? So it looks like these findings already tell us, go ahead with the interviews, go ahead with the participant observation of some important events, international events that are organized by the main brokers in order to understand better the motivation, the reasons why, the mechanism of the phenomenon. Another point I would like to stress is that here again we are only on the network for what concerns international ties. Another point, very important, was the dominance of not necessarily far-right actors as usual suspects like far-right political parties in these international interconnections. So what we could see clearly by several social network analysis measures was that there is an emergent visible cluster of interconnected movements advocating anti-abortion and anti-same-sex marriages. So let's say the portion of the regressive contention within the far-right family, including the anti-gender association connected with far-right parties, far-right movement, it's something real, it's something that is there. It is not by chance, let me say, that also the international events of the far right that we know are forthcoming actually include not only political party rallies. Think about the next CPAC, the conference that we will be organizing in May in Hungary. It is exactly through these events, as also the Protest event analysis did confirm to us, so not necessarily party rallies, but also educational events, cultural, let's say, events. Well, it is exactly through these events, which are international, where mixed actors meet, so parties, but also movement, but also anti-gender association. Well, it looks like they are the main events which somehow give a strength also to a network of contact that we can see represented in this way. If I have to stress another very important point, is that as the social movement literature were telling us concerning left-wing social movements, in particular for what concerned the Europeanization, it looks like there is a quite interestingly win-win situation, a sort of a connection among the density of network inside the domestic milieu and the capacity for the far right to go internationally. So it looks like this interconnection and linkages, so dense networks within the domestic sphere are something conducive also for the internationalization overall of the far right. In fact, we see that the two mostly densely connected countries inside France and Hungary are also those better well connected. However, this is not a rule, because as I said, there are also countries which shows at the domestic level a moderate to low density of networks like UK, Italy and Poland. However, they also show quite interestingly international networks. So they still maintain a significant portion of international connections. So this suggests actually that while the national density can help international linkages, it is not the only factor. So certain key actors can bridge gaps and foster international connections even in less dense domestic networks. And now let me, probably I'm going toward the conclusion. In these slides, I also have inserted findings for our protest event analysis and for our content analysis. Perhaps I will be able to show you just 2 slides, but now I think it's more interesting to start mixing the qualitative and quantitative data in order to start to have some first ideas of also the reasons and the motivation for transnationalization. And these extracts actually come from our interviews. So far we have been able to conduct around 25 interviews with far-right organizations in these 7 countries, including parties and non-party organizations. And what we are seeing at this moment is that there are some common and some recurring motivation in the words of our interview partners for this transnationalization move. So the first motivation is a sort of repression that the far-right organization feel by the supranational and transnational actors overall, or by the liberal order. So they very often use the word repression. So their motivations for the mobilization outside the border, their main motivations are shaped by the strong urge to forge transnational coalition in order to strengthen their struggles. So very often their mobilization is framed in the world of struggle. So this is also something very interesting, which is somehow different than what happened until recently. Think about the European Union and the European integration as such. Currently, there are very few radical right actors, party or no party organizations, which are strongly Euro rejectionist. What we see, and this has been also the matter of one recent article I wrote, what we see increasingly is what we can define pro-European nationalist. So the idea is that the supranational system, the supranational arena, in this case the European Union, is not something to be rejected or to go out from, but it is something to transform from the inside. And this is why the transnationalization is important. So these actors are pro-European, although the kind of Europe they construct also symbolically through their frames is an exclusive Europe. So as for instance it was explained by one interview partner, under the dictatorship of the single thought, we feel a deep need to support and help each other. And it is absolutely essential to have contact and a sharing, collaboration with many European states. Similarly, in another interview, which is a spokesperson of an anti-gender far-right association, it is pointed out that a coordinated strategy in all European states is strongly necessary to achieve their goals. And it is also very often underlined that the two main purposes, the two main goals for transnationalizing, both in terms of content, in terms of content, and in terms of events, is first of all to have arena of exchange of ideas, strategies, and also tactics when we talk about practices that can be adopted in different contexts to achieve similar objectives. So such cooperations are felt by these actors and also these networks as a sort of platforms, arenas, places where we can understand better each other and also learn from each other, diffuse information. And secondly, I can stress that these feelings of exclusion and marginalization by powerful entities beyond the nation states are strongly embedded in the emotional and cognitive schemes, no? Which are very often mobilized when they talk about the transnationalization. So why it is important to connect, to organize events together, but also why it is important to start having a common agenda together. And just in order to conclude the first two slides, and then we can raise other issues during the conversation. For what concerns the event chronology and the protest event analysis, it is interesting to see that I invite you to focus mainly here on figure number 151. It is important to stress that the intensity of transnational events of the radical right, protest event in the language of social movements, where for protest events we mean any kind of political action which is not election. So there is a very inclusive definition of what is a protest event, also for the regressive side. Well, the intensity of the number of these transnational far-right protest events actually increases for all the countries analyzed after 2008. So we see already some initial peaks, which is not surprising. Take into account that the overall framework started 2008. And then we can also talk about the methodology. Usually protest event analysis is conducted using newspapers of the countries in order to find transnational events. But until 2012, 2015, which not by chance are the years also of the immigration crisis, so to say. Well, after 2015, but mostly after 2018, there is an increase of transnational events. It is also important, however, not to be so, enthusiastic about the findings. So the total number of transnational events in almost all decades is only what we found, 300. Although here we can also start, reflecting on some methodological biases. In fact, it is not by chance that conducting what we called the chronology of events, which was based not on keywords searching for events in national newspapers, but the chronology of events was based on a completely different method, which was actor-centered method. So we did follow some specific prominent far-right actors in these 7 countries in order to see if on their web pages, social media, were some transnational event mentioned. Well, here, this graph pertains only few months around the last European elections. And you can see actually that the number of events is much bigger. In these events, we also included the transnational verbal, let's say, endorsement. And a point very important here, regardless of the method, protest event or chronology of event, it is important to look at the type of action, at the strategies. So basically, which kind of events are transnational? And it is here also very interesting to understand that the party rallies, leaders meeting are only one portion of this transnationalization of practices. Very often, a very important portion, but this is not surprising, is our verbal claims of mutual endorsement. So Vox, Meloni, Orban, as we see also recently, as we saw also in a transoceanic way. Now think about all the dialogue in the last few weeks between US and Europe, but also not only the expression of support, not only party rallies, but so electoral, let's say, meetings, but also many events are pure cultural political meetings. So those meetings I was mentioning before. So let's say all the actors that principally combine three types of transnational events: political rallies and party leader meetings, but also educational events, and also a portion of more demonstrative typical protest event, transnational, although this portion looks like raising and going down. So these pure demonstrations are mainly found around a certain month and around certain specific issues, like, for instance, it was in the past for Fortress Europe and the Identitarian, around the topic of immigration, and so on and so forth. I stop here just to give you an example now of what we are looking on concerning the content. In our content analysis, we did focus on 6 important issues, important for the radical right. So issues on which usually, but also more recently, the radical right take position. So beyond the usual suspect, immigration and citizenship, we also looked at gender, education and culture, but also environmental issues and climate change, and finally socioeconomic policies. As I told you, we did this content analysis basing on the social media. We collected again on the previous organizations that I mentioned, so all these 100 organizations, when this was possible longitudinally, focusing on Facebook. This time we wanted to change also the social media. We did focus at the end of the day on 150 Facebook pages, again, just for technical reasons, not for an existence of the actors offline. And we worked on more or less 80,000 posts. And here are the first findings. So if we select only...
Thank you, Manuela. Can we move soon just to wrap up so that we can
have
some time for questions?
If in our content analysis, which have been done according to dictionaries and keywords within these 6 policy domain, if we only focus on what we call, let me say, illiberal frames, so keywords referring to typical far-right illiberal frames to refer to immigration, environmental issues, and so on and so forth, we see that 2 top issues emerge across all countries. So 2 top issues are mobilized at the same level of saliency, so very high, but also including illiberal frames: migration and gender. Migration is the top issue in Italy, UK and France, gender, Poland, Hungary and Austria. There is a more, in relative term, presence of the other topics, but still present, like environmental issues which are increasing. And this is important. There is a strong emphasis in mobilizing through illiberal frames economic and social policy, at least in 3 countries, UK, Italy, and France. So I stop here. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to have the possibility to talk with you about this first overview. Thank you.